Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I forgot one thing. Just hold on. Bear with me, guys. All right. That's for you. All right, folks. Hey, we can barely believe this is happening. Can you guys believe it's happening? Yeah. Finally.
It's unreal, isn't it?
It's unreal for us.
I'm in denial.
I'm in denial. All right, so what we thought we would do is spend a little bit of time talking about how Angular happened, giving you guys a little bit of an inside look into what really happened. I think nobody really knows, not even us. But you guys can help us complete the picture. So, Mishko, how long ago did this start?
So I think it started at around 2008, 2009. And I was building web apps, and I was kind of passionate about them. But, you know, I kind of realized that every web app is the same thing. You have some DOM. You have to manipulate the DOM. And, you know, you need to get the data for the DOM somewhere. And so this is the data that the user needs to edit. And this data usually comes from a database. And what you have to do is you have to marshal the data from the database to the memory of the browser into the render view of the user. The user plays with the data or edits it, and then it has to go back to the database. And what is interesting about it is before you can build any kind of application, you really have to have yourself a database, you have to have security, you have to have persistence layer. And so there's a lot of pieces that have to happen. And just about every application is the same thing.
There's a lot of boilerplate you have to write.
A lot of boilerplate, right?
Totally.
And I wanted to see if I can simplify this. But I don't want to simplify it for developers. I wanted to simplify it for web designers, so people who don't know how to program. And because people don't know how to program, I had to be constrained to HTML. And this is where the idea of directives and extending the vocabulary of HTML came from. And so this was the original side project that I had. It was called Angular. This was the logo. And this was what it encompassed. It was end-to-end, including database persistence in the cloud, so that if you just have a static web server, you can actually build a simple web application, maybe inside of even in your blog post.
Now, why did you call it Angular, Mishko?
It's a very good question. A lot of people ask that. So it's Angular. My friend who worked with me on this, Adam Abrams, he actually came up with the name. And because it's HTML, and HTML has tags, it's angle brackets. So Angular is from the angle brackets.
Very clever.
Yes, I thought so too. I like clever bits.
It's a great logo too.
So this is what site was actually originally called Get Angular because Angular.com was taken. And as you can see, already we had things in there like managed database, embeddable, HTML, CSS, declarative, security, rich widgets. I mean, things that you are all familiar with today. Right? This was the original vision that lived on. But we had a really hard time explaining to people what it was. And so the best way we could explain it to people was that it was like a spreadsheet in the cloud. So you don't have to worry about the persistence or the security. You don't have to be a programmer. You do have to understand basic concepts like data binding so that you can say, well, this column plus that column equals this other column. But unlike a spreadsheet, which is limited in the sense that the UI is fixed, you don't have control over what it looks like, we wanted to make the UI HTML, and so you could have any kind of UI that you wanted. And so that's how we kind of explained this to people.
Right. So you had this fun side project, but we actually had to get some work done at Google.
That's right.
And I roped you into this internal tools project called Google Feedback that eventually became part of actually every project at Google. You guys use it today if you use Google products. And there were 3 of you on the project. I remember you had written, we were using the Google Web Toolkit to build this app. And you had written about 17,000 lines of code. We'd done it for about 6 months. And you guys were getting really cranky about the project. Tell us why.
Right, so I'm a big fan of testing. Actually, everybody on the project was a big fan of testing. And Git is really hard to test because it's Java. And so if you want to test it, all the code requires to have DOM. So you have to transpile it into JavaScript, and you run it inside of the browser. So it's this very convoluted process that takes a long time. So you can't just change something, push a button, and see a result. And the other problem with Git was that if you just wanted to have a label and just shift it a couple of pixels to the left, you actually had to change code, run it through the compiler, and get a result that way. And so it was a long time. If you wanted to make a new label, you couldn't just say bracket label. You have to say new label, add the label to a container, set the property on it, maybe set a font. It was just very cumbersome.
So there were a lot of steps between you and what you want to express in an application.
Right.
So then you made a boast to me. You said, hey, Brad, I think I could rewrite this whole thing we've been working on for 6 months in 2 weeks using this side project that I've been working on.
Yes, I made a boast like that. I didn't quite make it, did I?
Not quite.
It took me 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks. But it was down to 1,500 lines of code. And I think data binding was the magical component that made this thing possible.
And this wasn't really even Angular yet.
No, it wasn't. It was actually held together with duct tapes. I mean, this other project had other purpose. It was ripped out. The hardware was ripped out, held together by duct tape. It was a scary piece of code. And this is what kind of ended up being Angular.
Right. So at this point, I was very impressed. And I said, well, hey, we should spin this off as another project. And so I said, hey, Mishko, let's go out and recruit some other folks. And you found a couple other folks to work with.
Yeah, so I recruited this other guy called Shams Seshadri. He works with us on Google Feedback. He has since left Google and has written a bunch of books and does a lot of consulting.
Yeah, actually, I wrote a book with him, one of the first books on Angular.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
And then I found this other guy, or rather he found me on Twitter. Turns out that he was big into testing as well. We're from the same country, love at first sight. Igor comes and joins, kind of a thing.
They've been inseparable ever since.
Yes.
So we had been supporting the Google Feedback project, trying to get other people to use Angular. And it was really this kind of weird reaction. People would say, I don't get it. This is weird. Why would I use it?
Yeah, haven't you got the memo that putting code inside of HTML was a bad idea?
Yeah, so they would look at our templates that actually seemed to do something, and they would say, well, non-obtrusive JavaScript does not fly.
Yeah, it doesn't run through the verifiers of HTML and so on.
Right. So one of the parts about Google culture is that we go for review sessions regularly with our senior engineering managers. And so we were part of the Google infrastructure group at the time. We're part of ads now. But we went for a review with Urs Halsey, who runs infrastructure. And he gave us what I think is probably the best quote about Angular to date. And he told us, you guys are all liars.
Well, what did he mean by that, though?
So he actually meant that, yes, you've had a great success on one small project, small for Google's scale. Until you do something at large scale, you really don't know what you're talking about. Needless to say, we were crushed. Things looked pretty bleak for our project. And if you have a job, you will probably do what's best for your job so you can pay the bills. So we should have probably given up at that stage. If you have a career and you want to build on that career, you probably also do what's right for your career. We didn't do that. We were actually infected by what we think is our calling in life. And I think some of you are also infected this way. So we decided to practice what we call constructive disobedience. It's all worked out. Some of my other projects have not worked out. But then something great happened.
Yeah, so we open sourced it, and so because we open sourced it, people outside of Google were able to play with it at their homes. And some of these people actually turned out to be Googlers, and one such person was Mark Jacobs, who's going to talk later on. And he was actually part of the acquisition of DoubleClick, and he was tasked with converting the DoubleClick from .NET platform to Google platform. And they needed to migrate a round-trip application into a single-page application. And so they looked at different things. They basically set themselves a 2-week sprint. And so they said, we're going to do this in Git, and we're going to do this in Angular. And in 2 days into their 2-week sprint, they basically finished all the goals that they had. And so they tried doing it in Git, and I believe Mark said this morning that he gave up after 5 days. So they chose Angular. And remember, this is a tough thing to do because everybody at Google at that point was using Google Web Toolkit. And so
Mark was flying against conventional wisdom.
Yeah,
we have to thank
was also
Mark and the team a lot.
practicing disobedience over there.
Yes. But not everything went perfectly well on this project.
No, so it was awesome that
we had some rough spots.
We had some rough spots, but it was one first big project for us, and so there was lots of issues to be had and fixes to be had. And I remember one day at around 11 o'clock, we had kind of a grumpy meeting, and Mark was a little grumpy on the other side, and so I turned to Vojta.
Vojta's right here, by the way.
And I say, Vojta, you need to go over there. The next flight leaves in 2 hours, so you need to be on it.
So he hadn't packed anything. He had no clothes.
He did not.
So he didn't even have a change of underwear.
No, he didn't even have a change of underwear. So I had to give him my running shorts It was clean running shorts. And while he was on a plane, I was booking hotel rooms for him.
You didn't get that quite right either.
No, I didn't, because it turns out there was something going on that day in New York. There was no hotel rooms.
Fashion Week, I think.
I think that's what it was. And I managed to book 2 hotel rooms in 2 separate places for 2 different nights, but I got the dates wrong, and so he shows up over there and says, this is my hotel, can I have my room, please? And they say, you have 2 rooms for tomorrow, but not for today.
Not as good as for today. So I think he slept on a couch. Again, dedication. This is what the infection of a calling happens. All right, so we were starting to get some traction. A couple other teams had adopted Angular. And we figured, well, we need some kind of identity beyond our stabbingly yellow website, which some of you probably remember. And so we did a contest on 99 Designs for some T-shirts. I think some of you have these classic edition
Anybody
T-shirts.
in the audience who has this T-shirt?
A couple of you? Yeah, you in the front. All right, good. A couple of us.
In the corner.
Okay, but there still wasn't anything that looked like a logo. So we ran another contest. And here were some of the logos we did not pick. Some that I thought were awesome. Actually, I didn't like our eventual logo.
No, you were into this pyramid thing, and you had all the stories about zombies.
I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, so Mishka, you saved us. You convinced us that this final logo was the right one. Now, why did you like this?
I like it because it's a shield, and HTML5 has a shield as well, so it's similar because we're on top of HTML5 as well. It also shield representing that it saves you from the low levels of the browser, so it shields you from it as well. Plus, it kind of looks like a superhero logo, and we got the superhero theme going on. Yeah, there you go. So I think this was a good logo for us.
I agree. It's been the major reason for our success, I'm pretty sure.
Of course.
So then at some point, I thought it was really important for us to declare a 1.0 version, that there's a stable API that people can rely on, and that we could tell we will support this API. And so I think I made an ultimatum that you guys need to ship 1.0 by August of 2010. Did you do that?
No, we failed. It took us 9 months, so it wasn't until May of 2011.
Yeah, more constructive disobedience.
Yes.
So we eventually got to 1.0. And we had worked with the Google developer blog to announce this 1.0. We were very excited about it. We went out to a place called Michi Sushi. And the Google Analytics had just released a version for the phones, and we were there tapping to see what was available on it. And every time the number went over 100, we would have some sake. We didn't get that drunk that day. But you can see where we are today. It's fantastic. And obviously you guys aren't surfing it, so this must be somebody else. 588 people on the site right now. We think that's awesome. All right, so that's how we got here. A little bit of celebration about where we are today and how far we've come. So we've been tracking the trends of how many people search for Angular JS versus some other competitive frameworks. And you guys, some of you guys have seen these charts before, but we had been tracking to about mid-2012, and the blue line is Angular, and red and yellow are some other frameworks, which you can imagine, but they'll remain nameless for this conference. And we hadn't really looked at the chart for a while. And then kind of mid-2013, we took a look again, and we were floored. And this is thanks to you guys. So thank you, everyone, for adopting Angular and making it what it is today.
It could be we're really hard to find.
You just need to search a lot. Yeah, it could be.
Search a lot, yeah.
All right. Now, folks also ask, well, how is the adoption inside Google? And honestly, the adoption inside Google lagged the popularity of the internet. Google makes very big applications, and it's hard to do a rewrite. It doesn't happen all the time. But last October, we did the first internal conference for Angular. And we thought, well, maybe we'd get like 50 or 70 people to come. And so we opened up a registration form. We had over 350 people sign up. We couldn't find a space big enough to hold them all. Eventually, we had like 197 attendees representing 101 different projects inside Google from 15 offices around the world and every product area. So we've turned the corner there, too. Now, in the open source world, for a long time, we would have taken any issue submitted, any pull request. We would be excited to just get any attention.
It was crickets at the beginning.
There were crickets.
There were a lot of crickets.
Things have changed a little bit.
Things have changed a little bit, yeah. So at the beginning, really nobody was submitting anything. Although I think Wojtek might have been one of the first people who actually started sending a pull request. We thought we'd hire him since it was so good. But now we get about 10 to 15 pull requests a day. And as you can imagine, that's a lot of effort and work to actually merge all these things in. I know people think that it's just pushing a button and it kind of goes in, but you got to make sure that the documentation is up to snuff, that it runs on all the browsers, that the tests are good enough, that it's consistent with their vision. And this is a lot of work. And doing 10 or 15 of these a day is tremendous amount of effort. And so we actually should thank Igor for his amazing dedication and his processes that he keeps these things under control. If it wasn't for Igor, I think we would be swamped and overwhelmed here.
Right. And now, Igor couldn't do this alone, though. And so we eventually had to hire quite a few more folks. Now, you know this character, and I've always been around. And Igor came on board. Oh, wait, we were going to talk about me.
Yes, so this is Brad after being up for 30 hours at a conference in DevOps last year.
I don't think that's going to happen here. I think I was thinking about something then.
Yeah, I'm sure you were dreaming about Angular.
Maybe the pyramid logo.
Yeah, so this is Igor, which we hired shortly after. And this is Igor. You don't know this about Igor, but he's a machine. He will work for 30, 40 hours straight. This is what happens eventually. He'll just fall asleep.
I had asked him to watch my laptop, and so I found him hand wrapped around the cord, guarding it.
Even in his sleep, he's productive.
We told some stories about Voight already. Brian was our first, well, maybe not our first intern, certainly one of our favorites.
That's right. We liked him so much that Igor beats him on a regular basis.
Motivation to stay up and keep working.
Yes, this is how Igor motivates us.
All right. So Naomi, so at this point we were kind of getting big. We needed some management help. And we brought in I convinced Naomi to come work with us. This was before Angular was popular. So Naomi made a leap of faith, and she's our technical project manager. We also convinced James to come on. James came from the Google Maps world, where he was in charge of performance. He's doing a lot of performance work on Angular now, and you'll hear him talk later about Dart and the work we're doing on the Dart language. How did Julie come?
Julie just showed up at our office one day and demanded to be a part of the team.
The most awesome way to get in on something. Julie's fantastic. She's written the protractor framework for doing end-to-end testing. We'll hear more about that later, too.
Peter was actually one of the first person on the mailing list who started answering a lot of questions. And it kind of, again, shows the passion and the calling. We didn't, we didn't pay him to do this, but he just loved it so much that he did an awesome job. Eventually wrote a book, and eventually we were actually paying him.
And Matthias, we noticed Matthias for his Year of Moo blog, and we thought he should be a great guy to write some better documentation, which had lagged for a while. And
Not that our documentation is wrong or anything, right?
Well, documentation's hard. And so, but we noticed that he kept writing code instead of documentation.
Yes, yes.
So he was the guy who was eventually did the animation framework for Angular, and we're very impressed with the work there. Triu came to us from YouTube. He wrote the strict contextual escaping security framework that we have. Jeff came on recently. Jeff came from Deployed. You'll actually hear from Jeff later in the conference about using Deployed as a backend with Angular on the front end. Tobias, we found he, again from the community, did a bunch of work doing the jQuery mobile adapter for Angular, and he's doing a bunch of mobile work for Angular as well. And our most recent addition.
Caitlin. She just started sending crazy amount of pull requests that we had to notice how good of a quality they were, and so we hired her. And we have one more.
One more, non-human. Our first non-human member.
How many people have interacted with Mary Poppins?
All right.
Yeah, she's not actually a human, is she?
No, what does she do for us?
She's not quite a robot because she doesn't have any gears.
No, she's a bot on the net.
Yeah,
yes.
She trolls our pull requests, and she makes sure that they follow our standards so that the messages are correct, they have documentation and tests. And if you don't have those things, she'll comment on it and say, hey, could you please comment? And the funny thing is people actually have conversations with her.
Yeah, they don't know that she's a robot, and they reply to her. And,
I'll say thank you for letting me know.
When she becomes sentient and takes over all of these squares on the board, you know what happens. So in addition to these 14 core members, there's a lot of other folks that contribute to Angular. We have people at Google, and a lot of you guys submit tons of pull requests, work on issues, answer questions, and an even broader group that does tools and blog posts and talks like these. And so we just want to thank you for being part of this fantastic large community. It makes the job so much better. Thank you so much.
Some of the stuff that's out there, right?
Indeed, indeed.
So if you want to learn about different things, these are some of the classes.
Tons of courses. Thank you to John Lindquist, by the way, for doing such a fantastic job on some of the early work there.
Can you believe that there are books out there?
This is another time when we knew we were onto something good, when the number of books went beyond one.
Yeah, when publishers call you and they say, hey, would you like to write a book?
This is fantastic.
Didn't you write a book?
I did write a book, the one with the fish on it, which is obviously the best one.
Yeah. Well, I like the NG book because it's the thickest, man. It's got 600 pages.
Ari did a fantastic job.
I didn't know I wrote 600 pages worth of stuff.
Indeed. All right. Now, we've written a bunch of good tools. We think they're good anyway. Karma Protractor, Yeoman to help you bring your projects together, the Batarang plugin, to make it easier to debug applications. I think there's support in every major editor for Angular. Like, thank you to the JetBrains and NetBeans guys.
Not to start religious wars about which editor is better, but we use WebStorm on our
Some of us do. Some other folks use Sublime.
Sublime, that's right.
Yes, indeed. There's a ton of libraries out there as well that work with Angular. And you can find them all out on ngmodules.org. But some of the big ones are things like UI toolkits, like Angular UI, Kendo, Wijmo. And then things to help you communicate with the backend, like Breeze.js, Firebase, and the Salesforce adapters.
I want to talk more about Firebase for a second. So this was the original vision, right? Managing the marshalling process from the database and forward. But this is what we ended up with. The Angular framework lost the backend in the process. We started with the idea of a backend, but we lost it. And I always had this thing that it would be awesome if I didn't have to provision a database, because that's just a lot of work. And so the Firebase folks stooped up and they built something called Angular Fire. And what I like about this is that it completes the original vision of what Get Angular was meant to be, which is this end-to-end thing where you can host on static domain, maybe your blog post, just by adding some extra tags into your HTML. And you don't have to provision the database, and the security and authentications and all that stuff will be taken care of for you. So I like how, by leaving space for others, people step up and build the final product that you originally envisioned.
Keep that in mind. We want to talk about that in a minute, too. So, Mishka, we've done so much, and you guys have done so much. What is there possibly left to do?
Well, we could increment the version numbers.
That would be one thing. All right. So there will be an Angular 1.3 release, but we're very focused on the future of Angular that we're calling Angular JS 2.0. That there is some code, and you'll see some of it here at the conference today. But what really does Angular 2.0 mean?
So Angular 1.0 was for the browsers of yesterday, right? Like we wanted to make sure that everybody can use it. Angular 2.0 is really going to be built for browsers of tomorrow. There's lots of wonderful technologies coming up that we want to take advantage of. We'll talk about them in a second. And this is really what Angular 2.0 is really meant for. But we also wanted to support as many languages as possible. So Angular JS supports TypeScript and CoffeeScript through transpilation. Dart is a little different. Dart can't be really transpiled to JavaScript in a way that is usable. There's a lot of features in Dart that just don't map directly to JavaScript.
Semantically different.
Semantically different. Mm-hmm. So we actually had to write Angular Dart to take advantage of that as well. And when you're writing something for a second time, you get to learn from your mistakes and you get to improve upon it. So in a way, Angular Dart is actually an improvement over Angular JS, and we have learned a lot, and we're going to take all of these learnings and feed them back into Angular JS.
Right. So we can see some of what Angular 2.0 will become in the Angular Dart. Now, it isn't at 1.0 yet. We're at the 0.94. And we have written some actually large applications inside Google on Angular Dart. It's ready to try out. Now, one of the things we just said was that when we leave holes in Angular, it provides space for you guys to do even more impressive things than we could and show us new ideas. And so what if we made all parts of Angular pluggable? Now, how could we do that, Mishka?
Right, so by breaking Angular into modules, for example, today, if you like the dependency injection system of Angular, you kind of have to get the whole thing. You can't just say, I would like to take the DI system. And wouldn't it be great if DI would be a separate part, a separate library of Angular that you can use, and you can use it to build some other great things on the web? And by breaking Angular into pieces, you can also replace pieces. Now, this is already happening in the case of Angular UI router, which is a replacement for our built-in router. There's REST Angular, which is a replacement for NG resource. So people are already improving upon. And by taking Angular and breaking it up into lots of small projects, people won't have to start from scratch to build some next great thing. Instead, they can stand on existing infrastructure technology and build something great. So what Angular is going to become is more of an umbrella project for all of these libraries. You know, if you are new to the project, we recommend you start with these set of libraries to have Angular, but from there you can grow.
Fantastic. Now, you can never be too fast.
You can never be too fast. So one of the things is, though, we don't really know how fast we are because as commits come in, we don't know if they're making faster or slower changes to Angular. And so what we need to get is visibility. So we have this great infrastructure that when a commit comes in, we can test on all these different browsers, but we need the same exact infrastructure to tell us how we're doing in terms of performance.
It's a very hard problem. We've been working on it for a while.
Right. And to that end, we also want to look into lazy loading of code. You know, one way to go faster is to load less. That means you're going to have to load the other pieces later on. So we need to look into lazy loading of code, and this has to be integrated with dependency injection. It means some kind of module system. And so we should really take advantage of the future, which is the ECMAScript 6 proposal on module systems that, by the way, compiling to require JS and so on.
And Vojta will talk more about this at a talk later in the conference.
And lastly, data binding has to be fast. And so there's this new standard called Object Observe that's going to help us with data binding, and it's going to make them scale a lot better. But until that is so, we have some great ideas on how to build some polyfills for Object Observe so that today's browsers can use it as well.
Now, a lot of you out there have built Angular applications for mobile devices. Thank you for pushing the envelope. We want to say thank you because we haven't actually done much to help you. Not that Angular precludes mobile in any way. You guys have shown us how great it is. But we haven't done much to help. We'd like to do a lot more in Angular 2.0. One of the ways we think we can help is with a new persistence layer. And one of the things we're going to implement there is sort of an always offline capability that allows you to make sure your app works no matter what the connectivity is on a wireless device. We're also going to be adding something we're calling active animations. We have a fantastic, I think, animation framework for handling transitions, but we have nothing that will work as I'm swiping or as I'm touching, interacting with the device. So we want something that corresponds with that. We talked about performance a bit for reducing the initial load and just making it generally faster. We want to make sure this works well on a wide range of mobile devices. And then to cement our learnings and make sure we really understand, we're going to build what we're calling our flagship application. What this is going to be, so you notice we've built a lot of tools for ourselves. We built Karma, we built Protractor to make testing easier. We built Mary Poppins and a lot of other infrastructure. What we haven't done is helped automate our own process and make ourselves more productive. So we're going to be building an application on top of GitHub to make this triage process for Angular pull requests and issues, and then our own personal work tracking easier to communicate across a wide range of folks in the core and outside of the core. And if those of you who are interested in this and want to get a preview of Angular 2.0, we're going to invite you to come help us build this application with us.
You know, the vision is that you on your mobile device would get a pull request notification, and if it's something trivial like a documentation change, directly from your mobile device you could push a button, and this thing gets integrated, tested, and proven that it's all okay.
Absolutely. Now, over time, our APIs have become more complex. We get some criticism for a couple of these. What do you think maybe the top one would be?
I don't know, maybe directives?
Maybe directives. That's the API we all love to hate.
Yeah.
So what can we do there?
Well, directives is kind of unique to Angular, right? No other framework really has this kind of concept of extending the vocabulary of HTML. Originally, the original Get Angular system actually didn't. It was a fixed set of directives that we produced for you, and you couldn't extend them. And over time, we added the ability to extend. We added this compile versus linking function. We added components, transclusion, and you know,
it gets pretty big.
It gets big, and there was no overall vision from the very beginning as to what we wanted to do. And so you kind of grow. It kind of looked like a Winchester Mystery House, for those of you who've seen it. Yeah. And so we wanted to change that. And so we actually took this opportunity when we were rewriting for Angular Dart, and we improved upon it. I'm going to have some code samples later on. I know this is a keynote, but we'll have one or two code samples to show you of how it's going to get better. And we really want to take advantage of dependency injection and declarative code. It turns out, just as declarative is nice in HTML for UIs, declarative is also nice for structuring your application. Not for the imperative work of like how does the application behave, but for the structural as to how the application is assembled. And for that, we need type annotations and data annotations.
Right, so Dart has these things, but these don't exist in JavaScript. How can we take advantage of them?
That's right, they don't exist in JavaScript, but there is an upcoming standard coming up called ECMAScript 6. And ECMAScript 6 gives you classes and modules, so modules will help with dependency injection and lazy loading. Classes will help with having first-class citizens of concepts rather than just lots of anonymous functions. But we still have annotations. Now, in order to get ECMAScript 6 into today's browsers, you need to have a transpiler story.
Because it doesn't exist yet.
It doesn't exist yet, but it's going to be a standard soon. So we have a tracer, which is a compiler that consumes ES6 and produces ES5 so that it can be run on existing browsers. Because we have a transpilation step, we might as well add data and type annotations. Now, there's been a lot of work in this area in terms of, for example, TypeScript. And there's been some proposal for data annotations as well. And so by adding it into the compiler, maybe the exact specs will change in the future, but we can take advantage of all of these future technologies today. Eventually, the browsers will catch up. But we also wanted to make sure that it's compatible with the ECMAScript 6. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me first show you what this looks like. Here's what a directive in the future will look like. Now, this is not a speculation. This actually works in Angular Dart today. Notice that we have a class rather than an
By the way, this is not Dart code. This is ECMAScript 6 code.
Oh, sorry. This is ECMAScript 6 code, but it's very, very similar to Dart. Structurally, we have a class instead of an anonymous function. We have a constructor where we say we need an element. How do we know we need an element? Notice it says :element, so that if a minifier goes through this and renames element to something else, it's not a problem anymore because the element is a type that we're actually injecting. Constructor simply saves it. Now we have a function that actually does the work, which is it updates the source property of the element. But this function has to get called whenever the expression has to get changed. Now, how do we know that? Again, we have this annotation that says, look at the attribute ng-source, interpret it as an expression. Whenever it changes, go and execute this function. So if a minifier goes and renames the function to something else, again, it's not a problem. Also notice that the system knows that this is a directive because there's an annotation on the top that says it's a directive and it has a CSS selector that triggers this particular thing.
So this is very cool, a lot easier to write. But do you mean I'm going to have to use a transpiler to use Angular 2.0?
Right, so we wanted to make sure that we don't force you to use ES6. And so when a transpiler runs across this, it actually produces code like this. And this code is something you could have written yourself by hand. So you are not forced to use ECMAScript 6. You can still use ECMAScript 5. As you can see, you have your constructor function, just like you're used to it. You need to place the annotation. So we have a syntax for it, where you just have that annotation. Then you insert the annotation you wanted to place over there with the type information. Similarly, you create a source method, so source change method. You place the annotation on a source method as well. And so this is logically equivalent to what ECMAScript gives you. It's just a much nicer syntax in ECMAScript 6. But if you wanted to write everything in ECMAScript 5, you can do so. It's not an issue.
Okay, great. In Angular 2, we also want to make it much easier to work with external libraries, things that are generated elsewhere. Ignore the man behind the curtain. So how are we going to do that?
Sorry, that derailed me.
It's OK. So we're going to take advantage of some new standards.
Yes, we're going to take advantage of new standards. So there's an umbrella project called the Web Components. And Web Components has Shadow DOM, Objects Observed, DOM Mutation Observers, right? Those are all specific standards that are being worked on under the umbrella Web Components. And these standards allow us that different libraries can implement widgets, and they can work together. They can compose nicely together. This is something we don't have today in the web, but this is something that we're definitely aiming for, so that we have just one big love for all the libraries, all the frameworks out there, and they can cooperate together. And these are the technologies that will get us there.
So again, these things don't exist in today's browsers. How can we start making use of them today?
They don't exist in today's browsers, but we can build Angular 2.0 on top of it. And that's because our good friends at the Polymer project have built polyfills for today's browsers. So even though these standards are still evolving and they're not yet available, we can start building Angular on top of it. And these the polyfills allow us to do so.
Cool. Now, just a couple other things to wrap up. We want to make Angular much easier to use and more transparent. And let's talk about Zone.js a little bit.
Right. So Zone.js is an interesting concept that actually also came from Angular Dart. We have implemented this in Angular Dart. This is something that Dart folks showed us, and we really liked it. The idea is that you have a kind of a thread local context. Well, there's no threads in JavaScript or inside of the browsers. Rather, you have a callback local context. So as callbacks get chained and more callbacks get triggered, you can kind of keep track of the history and the tree by which they were built. And Zone.js allows you to intercept the beginnings and ends of the callback, so you can do some work. And one of the things you could do at the beginning of each callback is to register a stack trace, so that if an exception happens, for example, an XHR response exception happens, currently you can see the stack trace going all the way to the XHR response, and you don't know what was the request that caused this response, and it's kind of hard to debug. With long stack traces, you can actually continue through, and you can say, yes, but the request came in 300 milliseconds earlier, and this was the stack trace that triggered it. And you can go all the way to the stack trace, and you're probably going to get to some button click. And you can say, well, that's fine, but why is the button click registered on this particular location? And then stack trace will continue on the other side, and you can see who registered the click, the button click that was eventually clicked by a user, which eventually caused the request to come in and the response to come in. These are called long stack traces.
So one of the other side effects of this is going to be that you will no longer need to call apply. Brian will talk much more about this. One last thing, we also want to make it much more transparent to get more information out of our applications. Battering does a good job, but we want to make it possible for you to get the information you want. We're going to add some first-class logging facilities to it.
Right, Hevery.js is the way for the logging. We're going to instrument Angular so that you can see a lot more insight into when the digests happen, how long they take, what callback functions get triggered, and so on. And all this information can be streamed to console, or better yet, we can send it back to the server so that when you have an application in the wild, you can see how the real users are using it and how it responds to them.
Okay. Now, we want to make Angular 2.0 not just about our ideas, but about your ideas, too. And we're so happy to be able to interact with you guys at this conference and then beyond. Thank you so much for having us. Mishko and I, we can, again, barely believe this is happening. And we're looking forward to chatting with you on the rest of the show.
And I wanted to say special thanks to Brad for believing in us and letting us do this for so many years.
Thank you, Mishko.